All right, all right, all right. Hey ho, let's go. Hello, my legendary friends. Thank you so much for joining us today for another, what I hope you'll agree is extraordinary episode of Legends and Losers. Today, we're going to go right to the heart of our mission, and in particular, how to build a legendary business. And in this case, a legendary business that not only designs and dominates its first chosen category, but goes on to become a Fortune 500 company and then design and dominate multiple new categories. And of course, the company I'm talking about today is Amazon. And our guest, John Rossman, is an extraordinary executive, and I'll tell you more about him in a sec. But the net of it is he's the guy who helped set Amazon up in their marketplace business. That is to say, all the third-party vendors. And that really went on to become, if you will, the second category king business for Amazon. And as a company, you know, they continue to be an incredibly exciting company to watch. As of this recording, the stock is hovering at or above 1,000, and the market cap of the company is over 480 billion, and that is more than double that of Walmart. And so that really puts it into tremendous perspective. And in particular, if you think about Amazon through the category design lens, you start to see them in a somewhat different light. That is to say, if you think that what it takes to build a category king is you got to get the right product, company, and category to happen at the right time. Prosecute the magic triangle, so to speak. And, you know, that, of course, is an incredibly hard thing to do. Less than 2% of venture-backed technology companies in America go on to be worth anything of consequence. And so the odds are against us. And so when you consider what Jeff Bezos and the team at Amazon did just in the domain of books is incredible. And then, of course, they start to expand. And the big expansion they do next is a marketplace. That is to say, third-party vendors. And of course, today, when you and I go, let's say we go buy 12 things in our shopping cart at Amazon, but we don't know if we've bought them from 12 different vendors or half of them from Amazon and half of them from other vendors, well, what have you. All we know is we're doing business with Amazon, and Amazon makes it all awesome. And that today is about half of Amazon's e-commerce business, that marketplace business. And from there, of course, the company went on to design and dominate multiple new categories after that, kind of most notably the Kindle, which is in the e-reader space, and Amazon Web Services, which has become the cloud infrastructure platform. And they're in a battle today, a category battle with Netflix on content, and of course many others, but primarily Netflix. And things are getting very interesting in the home automation space. Of course, Amazon has the Echo and Alexa, and Google's in the business, and most recently, Apple announced they're coming. And so make no mistake, strap yourselves in. The battle in the home automation category is going to be massive. And the thing that makes Amazon so interesting, if you go all the way back to Clayton Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma, you know, what is it about companies, particularly companies who are successful category kings, and their inability to do it again, or their seeming inability to understand the magic triangle? That is to say, they get convinced, like Microsoft has so many times, that if they develop a superior product, they'll dominate in a new category, and yet they continue to fail. Or why prominent category kings, like you think about Google and what an extraordinary core business that is, and yet then they go attack Facebook, and you sort of say, well, you guys, Google, won that battle because you got the magic triangle right. Well, by the time they did Google Plus, of course, Facebook had prosecuted the magic triangle and was well past being the category king in social networking, and yet Google attacks them. And so the thing that makes Amazon so interesting is whether it's implicit or explicit, they seem to have developed a cultural understanding of what it takes to design and dominate in a new category and get the magic triangle right. And that's why this conversation with John Rossman is so powerful, because John was brought in as an executive to do that in really the second meaningful category king opportunity that the team at Amazon had identified, which was creating a marketplace. So that's what John did. He's a former executive from Amazon. He's responsible for launching and scaling that marketplace business, which, as I mentioned, is now responsible for over half of Amazon's e-commerce sales. Today, he's a managing director with a consulting firm in the Seattle area called Alvarez and Marsal. And he focuses on technology strategy, no surprise. And he wrote this book that really has been tearing up the business world, and one I highly recommend, called The Amazon Way, 14 Leadership Principles of the World's Most Disruptive Company. And so with that, here's my conversation with the legendary John Rossman. So John, tell me something legendary.
Well, one of the things I'm really proud of is I've been a partner at a consulting firm for the past 12 years, Alvarez and Marsal, and I got the opportunity to be an early partner in starting our Western region practice. And when you're a partner in a consulting firm, one of the ways you measure success is how have you impacted other people's careers. And, I've had the opportunity to help impact so many other careers. Others made way and helping me through my consulting career, and it's been a real blessing and for me a measure of success in helping lots of others attain their goals in career kind of through professional consulting.
John, if you accept the sort of the analogy that consulting is a lot more like coaching and being an operating executive is much more like playing, would you accept that analogy?
I think that's a very fair analogy, yes.
And as we look at your background, of course, what we see is a mix of both, a healthy mix of both. And so maybe share with me, John, your thoughts of as an individual for you personally, the rewards and the sort of the trade-offs going back and forth between player and coach.
Yeah, so I think the benefits of being a player, of being an operator, are the ability to stick with kind of one core thing for a longer period of time and having that ownership over a longer period of time of a set of results and a set of goals and aspirations. The benefit of being a coach or being an advisor is I get to see lots of different scenarios and lots of different, highs and lows, and accomplish things more through other people. And, but both of them offer, the ability to tackle hard problems. And that's what I really cherish in my career is like, I've always been a problem solver, and I like diverse, complex, multifaceted challenges in business. And that's what I've liked in both when I'm an operator and when I've been an advisor and consultant.
Yeah. The thing I found interesting, having spent 20 years as an entrepreneur and an operator and 10 years as a coach, and now retired from both, but the sort of the interesting thing, and there's lots of them, but off the top for me was, when you're an executive, you have what you could think of, John, as sort of positional power, right? You have people who work for you, and you do their reviews and their compensation and all that stuff. You get signing authorities and all the things that executives have. But then when you go to being a coach or an advisor or a consultant, you have zero positional power. And all you really have are the power of your ideas and your ability to communicate and collaborate with people. And so maybe help me with sort of the difference between the different kinds of power and what that's like for you.
Well, I mean, definitely when you're a consultant or advisor, you are getting most of your work done through influence. And the things you do are you don't, announce ideas. And I have one of my partners always talks about, be careful about being an insultant, which is like commenting about the negative things in the business or about what's going on. And that's, I think, really easy to do, but not very helpful. And so, the power of asking questions and pointing out other examples is the best way that I found to help lead people to the right idea. And so it's one thing to have, the insight or the knowledge, but it's a completely different skill set to be able to sell an idea. And at the end of the day, like, I want the ideas to be my clients' ideas. I don't want them to be John Rossman's ideas, and everything, right? Like that has very limited impact at the end of the day. And so it's like the tricks I love are around, like, how do you get a group of people to go, wow, this was our idea all along, and we're committed to it, and we're going to go through this hard change process.
And are there any particular questions that you think are silver bullets or have some magical properties that you like to use?
Well, I mean, so I deal mostly with most of my clients on kind of digital capabilities, right? So where either a business model or a customer experience is being changed based on, digital technology and data and digital mindsets. And so oftentimes asking them to step aside from their daily focus and playing a mind game, like, hey, if we were to start a venture capital fund and our job was to disrupt your business, what would you do to do that? And that, like, puts them on the offensive mindset versus kind of like a defensive mindset. And so that's a good scenario game to kind of get the mindset going in a little different way of, like, well, these are the things I would do to take us down, or to, change the business model or change the customer experience. And so that's one that I can find effective at times.
I love that one. Back in the early days of the internet, when we were running similar workshops, when I was at a company called Scient, we used to do the same thing. We used to do a workshop where we'd say, okay, you're all fired, and you're all at a venture capital firm, and you have as much money as you could ever imagine, and you have all the assets of your former employer that you want or don't, and none of the liabilities. What would you do to put us out of business, right?
Yeah. And a similar vein one that I get clients kind of asking me, we role play, is just like, how would Amazon approach the situation? Because they have such a, I think, unique set of perspectives on how they go about building new businesses and exploring new areas. And, they're a conglomerate business today. They're way beyond a retailer, and their journey into those businesses, I think, is a really interesting model for other companies to think about how they expand and continue to innovate on behalf of their customers.
Yeah, unbelievable company. And I was just checking before we started our conversation, and the market cap right now is 140 billion. Excuse me, 440 billion. 440 billion.
Yeah, I just saw some analyst expectations. I think it's right around 900 a share right now, and they're expecting it to go to 1250 a share, and all sorts of projections. It's either going to be Amazon or Google will be the first trillion cap company. It really is an amazing story.
And I'm trying to remember back in the old days of the dot-com boom, Henry Blodgett, one of the things, if I remember right, and you have to forgive me, it's been a couple of whiskeys since then, but he got, and one of the ways he got famous was for making a giant call on Amazon early. Am I remembering that right, John?
Well, he did, and I think he had a fairly bullish call that it was.
Was it 400 that he called it at?
400, and it wasn't until like 10 years after that call that it actually went to 400 again, or more than that, 15 years or something like that. So.
And the interesting thing, I was thinking about obviously our conversation today, and when you, and I of course want to hear it from you, but when you're entering the business, you're essentially an entrepreneur, so to speak, because you're starting the marketplace business. Yes,
that's right.
And back then, what year was that, John?
2002.
Yeah, so 2002. I'd love to know what eBay and Amazon's market cap were. Do you remember back when you started?
I don't. eBay was a bigger company,
yeah.
And they owned kind of the marketplace model at the time.
And so I just checked this morning because I think it's important context. Do you know what eBay's market cap is right now?
I don't.
It's 35 billion.
Wow.
Now, you look at that on its face and you go, hey, they built a $35 billion company in a category they created, which is, of course, an extraordinary and I would argue legendary feat. But it is interesting to think in the 2002 timeframe when you enter, eBay is a bigger market cap company. they are the category king of the marketplaces. They invented the concept for all practical purposes. And you have this job called compete with what at the time is one of the most legendary startups in technology history in a category that they designed. And you figured out a way to, if you will, redesign the category and help put Amazon on the track it's on today. So tell me about that, man.
Yeah, well, it was an incredible opportunity. And so, Amazon prior to 2002 had a couple of runs at marketplace similar businesses. They had tried auctions and they had tried something that was called Z shops, but pretty poor customer experience and pretty poor uptake. And, while, competing against eBay was on our mind, the thing we really focused on was just like, how do we create the best customer experience and a great seller experience that was in line with our values? And our values were around customer trust, and that a customer needed to trust buying from a marketplace seller as much as they trusted buying from Amazon, the retailer. And when we put that at the top of our principles and our objectives, then we were willing to do some really hard things to design a business process and a business model that accomplished that. And everything kind of flowed down from there. And I think that's where we, over time, and because we were patient with it, we really eclipsed eBay in that business.
Say more about what you mean, John, by we were patient with it.
Well, so we launched that business in October 2002 with the apparel category. It really wasn't that big a business until 4 or 5 years later, when the combination of marketplace sellers, the Prime business really became a big, promotion for Amazon. So Prime's customers being able to get second day delivery. And then the third element of that strategy was FBA, or fulfillment by Amazon. And that allows third-party sellers to put their products into Amazon warehouses, and they become Prime eligible. And that cycle of combination of tactics is what's really propelled the marketplace business. Today, that's over 50% of all units shipped and sold, and over 3 million sellers. But we stuck with it for many years until it really kind of hit that inflection point. It wasn't just marketplace by itself, but really kind of Prime and FBA and that combination that really set it into exponential growth.
Yeah, and it's interesting, John, listening to you talk, I'm reminded of what may be my favorite quote from Bill Gates, where he says that people overestimate the power of a new technology in the short term and underestimate it in the long term. And so it's interesting to see, or to hear you say, we had to be patient, and 5 years was patience, right? Because in the overall scheme of things, 5 years really isn't that long. The other thing that's in my head, I just have to say, in our book, Play Bigger, we did some data science research to sort of look at who are the companies that create enduring value, and as measured by, does their stock go up north of closing price on day one? Mm-hmm. And we looked for data science-based things to see if there was if there were any indicators in there. And the big one that we found was that the companies that create enduring value in the tech space all go public in 6 to 10 years from their founding. And so the aha we've had about that, we call it the 6-10 law, but the aha we've had about that, we triangulated that to new category design and development. Mm-hmm. And while this isn't data science, this is more interpretation, we believe what's going on is the reason the companies that create all the enduring value get public in 6 to 10 years is because it probably takes about 6 to 10 years for a category to really gel, and B, the king to emerge. So it's interesting to see, like, right in that time frame is roughly when you felt like the marketplace business hit that tipping point.
Well, I think one of the distinguishing factors of Amazon and Jeff Bezos as the leader is, they are appropriately patient for businesses, and they will incubate things for a very long period of time. Sometimes they quickly close them, sometimes they quickly try to scale them, but they don't have a preordained definition of like when something needs to happen in their investment scheme. And so they are very patient investors, and they have a high sense of urgency to get things done every single day. But when they're looking at a bet or a business investment, they're very appropriately patient. And I think that that's so hard for most leaders and most CEOs and boards, is to really bet on the long term, because they pay more attention to the street than I think is really healthy in the long term.
Yeah, and so actually that is one of the things that I thought was fascinating to chat about, because multiple times in the history of the company since it's been public, and I'll never forget sitting at a Goldman Sachs conference in, I want to say, what year did Amazon go public? Was it
99?
99, yeah. So I can remember sitting at a luncheon in New York at a Goldman Sachs conference, investor conference, and Jeff Bezos was the luncheon keynote speaker, and it was like being at a Beatles concert, you know. It was absolute craziness. I can only imagine. I can only imagine it now. My question, though, on this whole thing is, what is it about Jeff and or Amazon as a culture that has sort of allowed him to multiple times in the history of the company say to Wall Street, hey, kind of go fuck yourself. We're going to destroy margins and earnings for the foreseeable future so we can invest in X. And multiple times he's done it. Multiple times it's caused the stock to crater in the short term. And he just says, look, I don't give a shit. This is what we're doing. We believe in this. And whether it was the marketplace business or ultimately AWS and, you know, the Fire and the Fire phone, which failed, you know, all the things that required a dislocation in the typical sort of P&L view of the world from an R&D perspective, and all of those sort of good things that drive EBITDA. What is it about Jeff? What is it about Amazon that allows the company to just get up and say, hey, throw out the models, this is what we're doing?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's any one thing, but if I think it does start with Jeff and kind of his independent thinking and his ability to, you know, follow his instincts. And while they are an extremely financially aware company, they don't make decisions solely based on financial measures. And I think that, you know, and that's why I think the leadership principles of Amazon, they're so real. Like, these things aren't things that go on a poster on a wall. Like, these leadership principles are used in everyday meetings to help debate and make good decisions. And they're not always aligned. And so you have to work at it hard. But I think that culture of, like, you know, we are not prisoner to today's business or traditions. We are there to invent new businesses. We are there to create new customer experiences. We don't have to play by the rules. And we're empowered to make decisions at an incredible level across the organization in relative terms. I think that those are just, you know, many of the facets that they've proven as kind of their playbook for success.
Well, on a personal level, John, I got to thank you, because, of course, I love Amazon. I think a lot of people do as a consumer. Forget the business part of it, which I think is incredibly fascinating. Of course, I think Amazon's one of the greatest category king companies of the modern era, and you know, Jeff stands amongst very few others. But as a consumer, what I love about what you're talking about, so my wife and I participate in a community garden. We have a garden that's shared with 6 families, and we have hens, and we grow all this stuff, and we have this incredible experience with some of our friends and neighbors. And this coming weekend, John, we are planning the spring planting here in Santa Cruz. And so this morning, before you and I started our chat, one of the things I was able to do was go on Amazon and buy 4,000 of Uncle Jim's worms. And so twice a year, when we do the summer and the winter plantings, I buy all these worms to keep our soil great, and also to keep feeding our girls. So I was thinking about it this morning, because, you know, this business that you helped create is barely 15 years old.
Yeah.
And certainly at the scale that it is today, I mean, when would you say it reached sort of, you know, a huge scale?
Probably 2009, 2008, I think, is when the marketplace really became, you know, it's a retail force. It's driving like global economic changes. Like, if you look at like import from China, it's amazing how much of that is driven by Chinese sellers, third-party private label people building businesses on Amazon to sell in the US. Like, it's a global economic engine at this point.
It's phenomenal. And what is so incredible about what you guys have done is you have built a true network economy business. And, we had Mike Maples, the legendary venture capitalist, on Legends and Losers a little bit ago. And he talked about how he believes the economy, our whole notion of the economy is now 180 wrong, in that the old paradigm was scarcity. There's X number of bananas in the world, and there's Y number of people who want bananas, and Adam Smith's supply and demand. And essentially there's a fight for bananas, and it's all predicated on scarcity and how do I get my piece of something scarce. And he said he believes going forward the economic theory is actually going to change, that what he called the networked economy creates abundance, not scarcity. And as a result, competing going forward is A, how do we create new sources of abundance, and B, as the entrepreneur, how do we design and dominate that category around that abundance? You guys have done that, and you talk about the business as a platform business. So maybe help me understand, what's a platform business that ultimately creates abundance?
Yeah, so our definition of a platform business was a core capability that you could let others use to serve customers, and they can not only leverage that business, but they can actually innovate on top of it. And so oftentimes you use APIs and technology interfaces so that you can actually integrate systems and processes together kind of through that platform. And Amazon's launched many platforms, and the key notion behind it, and Bezos talks about this, is that when you allow others to leverage your core capabilities, they will try things that you would have never imagined, and it will go places that you could never picture. And basically you're getting to leverage both the innovation and the intent and the skill force of lots of others without having to pay them and direct them and everything, right? So lots of experiments get tried that you couldn't possibly afford. And so, but yet it leverages kind of your core capabilities and your infrastructure and things like that. And I think, the best, or one of the best platform businesses at Amazon is their cloud business, AWS. And that really, AWS started from when I was there at Amazon. So I left in late 2005. But when I was at Amazon, product teams owned every aspect of their technology. They owned development, they owned infrastructure. And we decided, hey, it only made sense to separate infrastructure from the applications. And the infrastructure team was going to give us, tools to help manage our server provisioning and server management.
And at the time, this is all thought of as internal IT, right? What's IT going to do for the business unit owners so that we can be more nimble? All the good shit we've heard about. How can IT empower the business? It was all of that internal dialogue, was it not?
That's right. That's right. And it was Bezos who said, this is great, but internal customers tend to be non-demanding customers. So you infrastructure guys, you need to turn it outside, have external clients, because that's the only way you're going to get really critical feedback to this. And what they found was that developers loved this on-demand, easy access infrastructure, which became AWS. And so I think that notion of how do I make my stuff good enough that I could have external clients is the opportunity for so many businesses, whether they decide to do it or not, still playing that mind game of what would I do to make this good enough, my core capability, so that I could have external clients. You will think about new improvements and innovative ideas for it.
It's so fascinating because we recently had Bob Evans on Legends and Losers, and Bob's you may know, a tech industry icon, was at Information Week for decades. And he's now come out publicly and said Amazon's the most important enterprise technology company. And you look at that and you go, AWS is roughly 10 years old, right?
Yeah,
Am I remembering that right?
That's right. Yeah.
And there are analysts on Wall Street that say if Amazon were to spin that thing out, it would be as valuable or maybe more valuable than fucking Oracle.
Right. Yeah, I think, and they, again, inventing from the customer viewpoint, their customers were developers, and, all of the traditional.
This was an internal customer, right?
It was, but again, we were forced to turn it outside, and so to have external clients, and then we found that they love it, and so it was both for internal use and for external use, and that was the innovation.
And do you think it appears to me as an outsider, but help me understand that what you did with the marketplace business, which as you mentioned is now about what 50% of Amazon's e-commerce business?
Yeah, over 50% of all units shipped and sold. Right. Yeah.
Jeez Louise.
Yeah.
Right. And that business is barely 15 years old, right?
And the great thing about it is Amazon has no inventory risk on that either, right? And they cherry pick, like they have all the visibility in the items that are selling and not selling, and so then they cherry pick the best of that and bring it internal to be retail items.
Well, and one of the things I love about it, my dear friend and mentor, Bob Howe, who was the CEO of Scient, and he was one of the senior partners at Booz Allen, had a storied career at IBM. He taught me this when I was in my early to mid 30s. That what you want is, he called it an increasing returns business. That is to say, you build an infrastructure that can support a certain level of business. In your case, obviously, transactions in commerce, both back end, supply chain, front end, customer chain. And that as you add more things, there isn't a commensurate addition of cost. That is to say, if you sell 1,000 things, and then you sell 2,000 things, there isn't a doubling of cost associated with that. And actually, as you add more things on top of a certain level of infrastructure, that revenue can hockey stick up and costs actually stay maybe not the same, but they don't move on the same line, if you will, the same trajectory of line as revenue. And so I guess with that said, did you guys build the most legendary increasing returns business in history?
And that part and that mindset was very purposeful. And we always talked about, we're making big investments now so that, we wouldn't have to increase marginal costs as we added more business. And one of your strategies at Amazon or objectives was always like this notion of how to scale your business, and scaling got to exactly what you talked about, which is how am I going to do more units in my business with a declining cost per unit on a year-over-year basis. And when you think about how to scale your business in that notion, then you go about, automating it differently, and you go about creating partnerships differently, and you completely engineer and instrumentate the business differently so that you can have that scaling impact on a year-over-year basis.
So one of the things, John, is such an important topic for all of us, is that, of course, category kings build ecosystems. That is to say, they sort of create this new worldview in their world, and then they sort of redesign the way both consumers and, certainly in your case, suppliers in a very gigantic set of categories think about, if you will, the rules of the game. Mm-hmm. And with consumers, it appears to me that you guys did some business model innovation that changed the definition of what a retail e-commerce experience should be. And when I as a consumer went, hey, wait a minute, yeah, that's how it should be. You showed me how it should be. Everybody who was not then kind of gets fucked because you rewrote the rules, particularly with consumer experience. And one of the big ones that I remember the most in the beginning of the business that you started was, if I want to go buy this Legends and Losers t-shirt and I buy it off some website I've never heard of, I have the experience that I have, and I either get it or I don't, and it's either high quality or it's not. And if I need to return it, I have whatever experience all that stuff, right? And in the beginning, of course, with e-commerce, it's like, well, how do I buy? You started with apparel. How the hell do I buy a pair of pants online? Because if that shit doesn't fit, I got a bunch of hee-haw I now need to deal with. You magically figured out with third-party vendors how to take responsibility of that experience. Can you walk me through that?
Yeah, and like I said, it really started with, that highest level principle of we wanted customers to trust it as much as they did buying from Amazon. And so, and I'll compare it to eBay. So, when you shopped at eBay, and you'd search for an item, you could find 40 different pages of that same item. At Amazon, we said, when you search for an item, you should find that item once. Now, there can be multiple offers to sell it, but that item is a unique thing. And so we created this concept called item authority, which meant that lots of people would be sending us information on this item, but it was our job. We had to do the hard work to reconcile and recognize, like, what is the one item that everybody's trying to describe here? Where's the best content and descriptions for that? And then everybody can list against that one item. And so that is a major innovation right there that really drove the business model, was that concept of item authority. And then on the fulfillment integration, eBay just like, hey, once the order's done, you guys are off on your own to settle it, and everything. We said, no, you have to do all of the transactions. When are you shipping it? When is it shipped? Tell us if you make adjustments. All of those things were flowed through our systems so that we would understand what was happening, and we managed that communication, and we put incredible metrics, instrumentation around that, so that we knew that sellers were doing the right things every single day.
Well, and I can remember in the early days a handful of times, not many, but a few times, as a consumer, having problems with some third-party vendor. And you guys took responsibility for all that too, right? So I don't know what happens.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know what happens on the back end. I'm not happy with the T-shirt, and magic happens, right? And even if the vendor doesn't want to play ball, you make them play ball.
And it was again, eBay was kind of like laissez-faire, like, hey, it's between you and the seller. And we said, hey, no, we take accountability for the transaction. If you're unhappy, we'll warranty it. We'll work it out with the seller. And just completely different mindset that drove us to different places.
And so is part of the learning there, John, that to create an increasing returns network business with a platform, if you'll allow me that much jargon in one sentence, if you want to be able to do that, you have to take responsibility over the customer experience.
That's right. A marketplace business needs to add more value than just connecting buyers and sellers. And there's lots of different ways that value can be manifested and articulated. But, warranty and trust is one of those ways. But you have to do more than just bring them together, because if you don't, then the next time the buyer and seller will just go do the same thing, but off the platform, right?
And I got to believe, because I know it's true in my household, it's got to be true in a lot of other households, which is if it's not on Amazon, we might not buy it, right? That is to say, if you want to pick up a new, I don't know what, and you go to the company's website, I always then go to Amazon to see if it's available on Amazon. Because if I don't have a relationship with that company, I don't want to enter my credit card and my bullshit. And plus I got an open cart with my Uncle Jim's worms in it and some other shit. And so has that started to happen now with consumers very broadly, where the preference from buying it from Amazon is so strong? I, as a e-commerce retailer, have to think long and hard about not being on your marketplace.
That's right. And over the long term, customers have learned when it comes to product searches, most product searches start at Amazon, and everything, right? And so, and we were listing items at Amazon and search results when we weren't even in the category, because we made the bet that over the long term, customers would learn to come to Amazon for product searches. And we were concerned about search engines, Google in particular, kind of getting disintermediating Amazon between its customers. And so we did a lot of things around acquiring content, in particular item content, even when we weren't selling the items, and referring search results to others, just so customers would learn, like, even if Amazon doesn't sell it, they're the best place to come and research
to go check it out. Is that why, out of curiosity, is that one of the reasons Amazon's so text heavy, is to catch all the crawling?
Yeah, that's likely. That's right. Yeah. I don't know a lot about search engine and crawling on that, but that makes complete sense.
I've often thought that's the case. I mean, and I don't mean any disrespect, but the Amazon UX is far from beautiful. But it's highly functional, and I've often hypothesized that it's text heavy for a reason, because the internet search engines are all text oriented, right?
Yeah, I mean, the problem with having the world's biggest catalog is that you've got the world's biggest catalog.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so it is like search and browse continues to be something, recommendations continues to be an opportunity where improvements will be made.
Yeah. Now, if we could go back to those early days, you come into the company, you're
Coming from a failed.com, we've all had them in our past in our, genre and everything. So it's coming from a failed startup. Yep.
so what did and I mean this with love, John, what did being a failure on the way in, how did that impact your success at Amazon?
Well, I was hungry. I had been a partner at Arthur Andersen. I left that partnership to do this startup. We had moved to Seattle. I had a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. My boys were that age when I joined Amazon. I took a salary, and this was 2002. And if you remember 2002, right? So
I sure do. The traffic in the Bay Area back then, John, was fucking awesome.
Yeah, it was right. And so, it was just a job. It was hard to get a good job and everything. And so I made a bet, took a salary that was far lower than I had been used to. And I made a bet. And so I was hungry coming in to, be successful and leave a mark.
Now, most of us, when we get a new job, we get a honeymoon of some sort, right? Whether it's a month or 3 months or 6 months or, and you obviously had a very, very high profile job. Did you get a honeymoon on the way in?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it that at all. I remember my first week, we actually made some trips down to some key clients that we were talking to about coming and joining on the platform in our first categories and stuff. And I had a couple of engineers with me who were, really smart people, but they didn't understand like the song and dance of like, when you have nothing, how to sell nothing at that point, right? We were selling pure vapor and vision. And, I had to represent like our business at that point and everything. And, that was fun, but, and thank goodness I had done so many interviews because I really knew the business pretty well coming in. But yeah, there was no honeymoon at all. And the other thing was like, one of the guys that hired me, Jason Kyler, he was like, yeah, John, I think this is going to be a really small team. And I was like, Jason, like, I think this is going to have to be a really big team. But I knew like I was going to have to demonstrate that. And so when we started, it was me and a couple of people to run this merchants team that was bringing on sellers. And that forced us to innovate in a lot of ways, but it allowed me the time to really have my hands in all the goo. Like I was a detailed guy at that point. And so I innately understood the challenges of sellers, and I innately understood all the challenges we were having at Amazon. So I had very good insights that once we started scaling the teams and the businesses, like I knew the details of it, right? And that was a real powerful position for me.
And so I'm curious, the way you describe it, John, sounds a lot like the way a founder of a startup talks. And you are a unique cat in that you had a failure as an entrepreneur in a startup, and then you had one of the greatest, if you'll allow the term, intrapreneur successes in modern history. And some people have the opposite of that, right? They fail as an entrepreneur and are successful as an entrepreneur. But it's fascinating. So if you could maybe juxtapose for me, John, the experience of an entrepreneur versus an entrepreneur, and how your entrepreneurial experience in a startup makes an impact for you and your ability to essentially start and design a new company and category inside Amazon.
Well, I think the key thing, so I was at a data integration startup called Commerce Route, and I led professional services. So I really led all the client related implementations. And, the thing that I learned there was just like, when you have something that like how to separate all the noise from the things that are really important. And that's what I took away really from both of those experiences, is that it's so easy to get distracted. But when you are trying to get really hard things done with big constraints and limited time, to me, my best bet is like, how do I put the blinders on and completely get myself and others focused on that and to alleviate the noise around us? And having a good orientation on how to do that and letting others know that you're doing that. So please, if I'm tuned out on these things, please understand I'm tuned into these other things and don't take it personally. Those are some of the things that I learned in both of those experiences that I still leverage today.
And were there times, John, along the way where your internal support for this new merchant business was, in our book, Play Bigger, we talk about the fact that there's virtually always at least one executive who's a nefarious bastard trying to unhook whatever the new innovation, whatever the new idea is. So there had to be some times along the way where
yeah, and so our business was set up to compete with Amazon, the retailer, right? And so even though we launched in apparel, Amazon wasn't in, but we soon launched in consumer electronics, and so we were putting sellers on that were competing directly against Amazon, the retailer, and that's what Jeff and the executives wanted, but there was merchant teams who were kind of like against that. And so, the nice thing is we had great air cover from Bezos about like, this is exactly what we want to do. The smart thing we did was from the beginning, like we separated kind of the merchant team from the traditional categories teams. They've integrated those things since then. But when we started off, like we were kind of in a cocoon and, we knew it's like, hey, our job was to create competition for Amazon, the retailer. And Bezos was like, if customers win, we will all win over time.
But I got to believe if I'm the executive who's in charge of, I don't know what you might call it.
Retail.
The traditional retail business, and I'm watching you doing your thing. There's got to be a moment where I go, John Rossman's an asshole. There has to be a moment where that happens.
Yeah, the biggest disbelief was that we were going to be able to scale to tens of thousands of sellers at Amazon. And so there were some fulfillment and logistics leaders there who had been implementing drop shippers, which is similar to a third-party seller in some ways. And they were very skeptical that we were going to be able to bring on tens of thousands of sellers. And that's where I remember the biggest skepticism, like, yeah, good luck with that. We'll help, and everything, right?
Yeah.
But, we stuck with it. We proved them wrong.
And remind me, John, how many third-party or partner retailers does Amazon have in the ecosystem now?
3 million is the number they report.
3 million. So this is something I think that Amazon doesn't get anywhere near enough credit for. As you probably know, John, I'm a huge fan of entrepreneurs, and I'm a huge fan of what's going on with technology right now around its ability to level the playing field for what you might think of as small E entrepreneurs. I love the big E entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley and Seattle and all around the world who raised $200 million. And, Jeff Bezos, of course, was that kind of big E entrepreneur from Kleiner Perkins and all that good shit. But the interesting thing to me about those kinds of entrepreneurs is if they fail, nobody misses a meal typically, right? Whereas small E entrepreneurs, if you and I are two guys and we're starting a small business, if we're Uncle Jim's Worm Farm, what Amazon provides is literally a platform to the world and an ability to acquire and serve customers in a way that was never, ever possible without it. And to have the infrastructure of, if you sort of forget about Amazon for a second, if you roll the clock back 15 years and say, hey, would every small retailer in the world like the equivalent of the back-end logistics capability and the front-end marketing capability of Walmart, by way of example? And you can just plug into it, pay a transaction fee, and Bob's your uncle. Ultimately, that's what ended up happening. And so I guess my point in all that, John, is whether it's the merchant business that you created or the AWS business we just talked about, in both cases, it strikes me that Amazon has created a networked platform for smaller entrepreneurs to plug into an infrastructure that gives them the ability to compete on a level that they could never have before. Is that the way it was thought of inside Amazon, or how was it thought of?
It was definitely thought about as that, but I don't think we ever had the vision that it would get to be as big or as impactful that it is. And I think now they see their goal is to be the world's largest company and to continue to get into new businesses. And I think especially the big moves they're making in logistics right now really point to where some of their next big businesses are going to be. And I think it's in the logistics area, but it hasn't been without, pain. And they talk about it as disruption, right? And, so thousands, tens of thousands of new third-party private label companies have been born out of this. But on the flip side, lots of really good retailers have suffered the consequences of that because they haven't adapted to many of the new trends and customer preferences. And so, for every winner, there's a loser out there, right? And I think that's the need to change is the challenge.
Yeah, but you know what? You're way nicer than I am. Go fuck those people for not innovating. Listen, and you may not want to say anything, but when I go to a physical retailer today, which is not that often, I'm blown away. I was in we have a Target, a small Target in our town because we're a small beach town. But, I went in there a few weeks ago on like a Wednesday afternoon, Target in Santa Cruz, California, right? It's a bunch of, moms and potheads. And I would have thought that if I was a physical retailer in Amazon's world, which I am now living in, which I think is absolutely the case for Target and for most other retailers, if my big differentiation against you guys is I have physical locations and you don't, although I know Amazon's moving there, but forget that for a sec. Wouldn't I say, I'm going to make this the most legendary physical experience possible because Christopher Lochhead can sit there in his underpants and order anything he wants to come to the house. I would think that's what you'd be working on, at least as one of the things to deal with Amazon crushing you. And yet you go to a physical retailer today, and the experience that I have, even at a store that, once was considered to be a standard that we should look at, it's a soul-sucking experience. You can't get any fucking help. It's hard to find people in there. And the thing that drives me crazy is this automated checkout bullshit. And the automated checkout bullshit doesn't really work that well. So you got to have two people helping people with the automated bullshit. And the whole thing is a giant exercise in frustration. And the entire time I'm in there going, hey, you guys are going bankrupt, eh? Like you guys are Blockbuster. You know that, right? If you were smart, this is the part you'd make good. Why don't these retailers understand this?
Yeah, I think they do understand it. And it does point to how hard making changes is and changing cultures, and while treasuring the past, not letting it be the thing that limits you, going forward and stuff. And that's why I love, I'm a partner in a consulting firm now. And that's why I love working with my clients, because it is really hard. And it's not just about company change and corporate change, but it's about individual change, right? And getting these leaders to, evaluate opportunities and to push through things that before they used to just delegate to and everything. Like that's where I get to work with senior leaders and helping them make personal change along with the corporate change. And I'm actually pretty optimistic about physical retail, but I think it is definitely going through a rebirth at the point, and it's messy right now, right? And you're going to see a lot more change. I think Amazon Retail is an $80 billion company, and it's still growing 26% a year, which means it will double in 3 years, right? So it'll be a $160 billion retailer in 3 years, right? It's a zero-sum game more or less at the end of the day, right? And so there's more pain coming in retail.
Well, and aren't shopping malls turning into? I think it was it Dawn of the Dead or Night of the Living Dead? It was one of those zombie movies from I want to say the 80s where they're all zombieing around a shopping mall.
And that's why malls, like there's forecasts that over half of them will go into bankruptcy over the next 5 years, right? And I really think malls have to become about experiences, not the place so much about the shopping's kind of needs to become an afterthought. And that's why activities, people still need to socialize, right? And they want physical contact and they want experiences. And that's really, I think, the opportunity for most retail and for malls. It's about experiences, not just about finding an item.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, I know you're doing a lot of work and you've done a lot of thinking in the area of the Internet of Things. And, it's been an area of focus for me for several years now. And so to tell me a little bit about what you're doing with IoT, John.
Yeah, sure. So I get to work with clients on a lot of digital capabilities, and I've worked with a few of them on a digital strategy, which really was about their Internet of Things strategy. And what I noticed was that there was a lot written about interesting business cases and interesting examples, and a lot written about the technology, but nothing was really simple that would help a business leader answer the question, what should my Internet of Things strategy be? So the book I published last year is about that. It's called The Amazon Way on IoT, 10 Principles for Every Leader from the World's Leading Internet of Things Strategy. And basically I give 10 different models for how IoT can impact the business, improve customer experiences, drive internal operational improvements, and build new business models. And then a simple recipe book, similar to how we would build a strategy and a proposal at Amazon on how to build your IoT strategy. So it's meant to be a real straightforward and simple way to help any business leader contemplate, how could IoT impact my business?
And what are, a couple things off the top that if I'm a business leader and I'm thinking, okay, I've been hearing about IoT now for several years and maybe we're doing some stuff, maybe we have some pilots going on, but where should I focus and where do you think the big breakthrough in the kind of, maybe not near term, but let's go medium term, John, is?
Well, I actually do focus on the near term, and everything, right? And I think so much is being written about some really important trends around smart cities and all that. But, I work with business leaders who have to deliver results today. And every company has continuous improvement programs, right? So TQM, being agile, statistical process control, all of those things. What do all of those different methodologies have in common? Well, it's really two things. One is they focus on decreasing cycle times, improving quality, decreasing inventory costs, right? And decreasing waste. And they all rely on data, right? And the problem with all of those is getting the data. And so IoT which is basically putting sensors on everyday objects to collect events and data that you couldn't before, and creating a digital shadow for everyday objects, allows you to take your continuous improvement programs to a whole new level, with the business result being improving cycle time, decreasing cost, improving your inventory cycle times, your manufacturing, all of those things. And so that's where so many people think about it as like this disruptive force, and it will be, and it is, but the near-term opportunity for every leader is like, how do I continue to take the improvement programs that I have, but infuse them with a lot more data than I normally would?
So if I try to synthesize what you're saying around IoT, and if this is overly simple, give me a whack. Where is my shit and what's going on with my shit, my physical shit that's probably in the world? Do I start with that? Like now I know where all my shit is.
Yes. Start with like what business problem or what data would I like to have and don't constrain yourself with any sense of like, is that physically possible? So start the exercise with asking like, what data, what event, what business problem am I trying to solve? And then ask yourself the question like, well, what type of sensor might be able to get me that data or be a triangulation to that data? And that's how you go about building value with IoT.
Yeah, it's interesting, because on the consumer side, everybody sort of talks about Nest and these kinds of things, and that's all cool, and we can talk about that. On the enterprise or business to business side, I could argue there's going to be much more transformation as a result of IoT. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're absolutely right. And I really like focusing on the B2B and the industrial side of it. I'm an engineer by background, and I like, dirty jobs. And I think the easiest opportunities are around kind of worker safety and improving difficult work circumstances. I'm working with a small company. It's a startup called Module, and they've created a belt that helps measure worker stress and strain so that you can both predict and analyze workers' compensation and back injuries, and everything.
So wait a minute, my employer attaches this thing to my back and they know when it's sore?
They can predict when you've been overworked and the type of stress and strain. And so their ability to help avoid incidents and to be able to manage it when it does happen is so much better than today's environment. And so I think that, worker safety is a huge opportunity for how IoT impacts businesses today.
How exciting. Very, very cool. And I have to ask you, John, of course, you're an incredibly successful author now with 2 books out, and you self-published on Amazon.
Yeah.
And, I went the traditional route with my co-authors and we were lucky enough to get I don't know how we got HarperCollins to publish our book, but we sure did. And so, and I know you're probably going to be biased here, but you wrote a best-selling book as a self-published author on Amazon. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, and I wrote it, I had left Amazon. It had been 7 years after I left Amazon when I started writing The Amazon Way. And I had a client at the Gates Foundation, and Greg came to me one time and he goes, you do such a good job at taking little anecdotes from Amazon and inserting them into our situation and helping us see the opportunity. He goes, you should write a book. And he had worked with Bill Gates on his 2 book projects. And so I said, great, but you're in with this on me. And so Greg's been a great mentor to me. And, I had never conceived writing a book, but it actually I've loved the discipline and the forcing function of having to write things down has made me so much better at clarifying and getting to my points in everything that I do. And so it is a really healthy exercise. And I'm extremely fortunate that I had a great story to tell. People go, oh, you wrote these principles. No, these aren't my principles. These are Amazon's principles. I just paid attention in class, and everything, right? And I figured out how to use them to help other business leaders innovate and to move faster and to have better cultures. And that's my passion today, is helping other leaders create the type of culture that moves you forward.
And do you think you got preferential treatment from the Amazon algorithm, given your history?
I have no evidence of that at all. The only benefit I have is that Amazon is looked at as such an exemplar in competing today, that the principles get they do get some exposure. And my book is the book on the Amazon leadership principles.
Well, and the interesting thing, as an author myself, although even when I say it, it sounds ridiculous to me.
Does,
but
yeah.
anyways, it sounds pompous and ridiculous. I'm a guy that got thrown out of school at 18 for being stupid. So, but anyway, the level of success you've had with your book, you don't normally see independent self-published authors have that level of success. There's even with all the power of self-publishing and so forth, it's still the machines. Here's what I noticed. When we launched our book, Play Bigger, the aha that I had was by having, in our case, an agent in Jim Levine and Hollis Heimbush at HarperCollins, incredible guy.
Yeah.
And it was sort of like being a Sequoia or Benchmark or Axel or Kleiner or Andreessen or, a top tier venture capitalist funded startup launching. Because when a company that's funded by those legendary VCs launches, the world pays attention in a way that, John and Chris's excellent adventure with a couple of bucks from mom and dad don't, right? And so one of the values I've associated with the sort of the traditional publishing model is as simple as that stamp of approval when the world says, hey, wait a minute, Jack Welch and Gary Vaynerchuk's publisher published this book by these 4 knuckleheads. Pay attention. But you've achieved a huge level of success without that stamp of approval. How do you think you did that?
I think it really is. Amazon's story is a great story, and everybody's trying to understand, how do they do it, and everything, right? And how do I get some of that? And so I think I just had the benefit of a great story to tell, and I got to practice it for a number of years with my clients. Of what are the little anecdotes, the little moves that we did at Amazon? So I wrote all those things down, and it wasn't until Greg encouraged me to write a book around. It's okay, yeah, there is a story here, and I want to share it with others.
And I'm also curious, what's been the reaction inside Amazon with Jeff and the executive team and the employees at large?
Well, I get thank you notes every week from somebody either interviewing at Amazon who is at Amazon and talks about the impact that the book has had in them understanding why Amazon is different. I've gotten no official recognition from any of the senior people, which I really think is the best I could have hoped for in everything, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. It appears, I don't know if it's a stated policy, but it appears that Jeff and the Amazon leadership team, you don't see them endorsing books.
No, they don't. And
which is
yeah,
obvious, an obvious conflict. That makes total sense.
right.
Before we kick out of this wave, John, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I do think that writing is a great exercise to force you to get to clarity. One of the little tricks from Amazon, and you can Google this and everything, but any proposal or project that you're going to do at Amazon, you have to write a narrative for it, right? And everybody uses PowerPoint, and we've dumbed down our ability to synthesize and to describe things at an appropriate detail by using PowerPoint. And so the narrative process, which is a 2 or 6 pager where every word matters, but the whole goal is that somebody should be able to read it and understand it with clarity without having to talk to you. And what it does is it forces teams and people to get clear about their ideas, and then it forces the people who want to digest that to be able to read that narrative. And so I would recommend writing out what your proposals or your ideas are to a degree where others can pick it up and not have a ton of questions afterwards.
It's such great advice. And it's interesting, in my work as a coach, when I was still doing that, what I learned is a lot of what you're trying to do is take things that are implicit and make them explicit. And to your point on writing the book, when you go to do that, you actually have to say, hey, wait a minute, what am I actually thinking about what I'm thinking? And I'm reminded of a legendary quote I heard from Peter Drucker towards the end of his life, where an interviewer asked him, Mr. Drucker, why do you keep writing and giving speeches and all that? And he said, well, writing it down and having to talk about it is the only way I can know what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I have found the same exact effect, and it's really surprised me how much I take away from being forced to write things down. And I work with my clients. I've got clients right today that I'm working with on writing a narrative. And while so many of them say, oh yeah, let's do that, when it comes to the iterations and that sentence is not clear, we don't understand each other on that point, their unwillingness to really dig into it and to work hard. And it's if you think these results come easily, that is the biggest error people make, is oh, if I go through these little exercises, I'll be better. Man, you got to put in the work, and you got to sweat it out, and you got to be committed to the change process that you're under. And if there's any hesitation at all, you won't be successful at it.
And the other one I love in here that you talk about is this concept of a future press release. Can you shine a little light on that?
Yeah, so the future press release is another exercise you do, and its goals are to help inform a broader base of people, right? So it doesn't have all the detail that the narrative does. But a future press release starts with describing, why did my customers love whatever service or feature that you were talking about? Then you would have whatever the appropriate metrics are, business case. But the third part of the press release is where you covered what were the hard things that we had to do to attain the success. And you wouldn't necessarily cover how you did it, because the work is still to be done. But you start getting on paper, and you start contemplating and communicating to others what a great thing this is, but there's some hard work to do, right? And so, and I encourage people to get the things that are sensitive or difficult to talk about on paper, because change doesn't get any easier by hiding it, right? It only gets better by truly helping people understand that the expectations are changing, and we have to buy into those together.
And the big thing that I took away from the narrative and the press release and all that is it strikes me, John, that the learning here is, you, again, correct me if I'm misunderestimating this learning, ground yourself in the reality of the future you wish to create. And the more vivid and real you can make that out into the future, the more likelihood our actions and behaviors in the present will align with creating the future that we intend to create. Is that the mechanism you're really trying to create here?
That's absolutely it. And when you're working in teams and in bigger organizations, the biggest challenge is making sure that people are actually talking and communicating at a detailed level, and everything, right? And you talked about some bad checkout experiences. Well, that's because at some point they weren't talking at a detailed enough level to communicate what was going to be needed. And so getting things to a super simple and clear definition so that people aren't talking past each other, and that we are starting with a clear future vision and working backwards. At Amazon, we talked about start with the customer and work backwards. That's exactly what we're doing with those exercises.
I love it. And what are you most excited about the future? As you look forward, what are you most excited about?
Well, I mean, professionally, I really like getting out and talking with teams and challenging them to recognize what's positive about their past and their culture, but like how to think differently and how to act as a disruptor. And then personally, we recently moved to Southern California, and just really excited to be down here.
Sorry about the lack of rain when compared to Seattle, but I'm sure your family's coping.
Yeah, like all good things, like there's been some ups and downs to it and stuff. And, we have one son that's still in high school, and that's been ups and downs, but those are the situations that make you stronger and stuff. So I'm really excited to be down here in Southern California.
And just a few months ago, you made that move, right?
Yeah, just about 7 months ago and everything. And we miss a lot of friends and family up in the Northwest and everything. But it's been, we just needed a new adventure. And I'm going to probably start working on another book and things like that. So I'm excited about,
So book number 3 is going to happen.
Yeah. I think what it's going to talk about is personal skills to be relevant in a digital era. And what are those non-obvious skills that are needed in order to be successful? So an example is, IoT. One of the things IoT does is it brings about a lot of partnerships, right? Because the best customer experiences now span across multiple companies. Like an easy one to explain is Amazon, DHL, and Audi. They've launched a service that allows a customer to have an item delivered to their trunk. The DHL delivery person gets a one-time electronic fob to open up the trunk. They put the item in, they close the trunk, and the item's delivered, right? And the fob's deactivated. Well,
hold on here, Hanson. Yeah. Let me make sure I understand. So I'm at work, or I'm at a restaurant. My car is parked wherever it's parked. In this case, it's an Audi. And I decide I want my Pampers, or the Amazon Way by John, delivered to my trunk while I'm at work or wherever I'm at. And DHL delivers my Amazon product to the trunk of my Audi. Is that what you just said?
That's right. It's a beta. It's in Germany. Don't know if it'll scale out or not, but it's an early experiment, right? But I think what it points out is like that's 3 companies working together in a very operational partnership. And so I think that understanding how to create and run partnerships at that type of operational level and precision is a non-obvious skill set that's going to be really important in our digital future. And that's
so this sort of digital logistics meets data science is going to be a new field.
It meets partnerships, right? Which is meaning important customer experiences that go across multiple enterprises.
And so if we go back to the Mike Maples comment about abundance in the networked economy, if I'm somebody looking at my ecosystem and I'm trying to be a category king, I should be looking at mobilizing my ecosystem in unique ways, and how do I use IoT to do that to deliver a customer experience, i.e. the Audi DHL experiment.
As an example, right? I mean, I always just think about like, understand your customer and the customer experience, but do it in a much broader lens than just exactly how you serve them. Like understand the end-to-end customer experience, and where is there a lack of good integration? Where's there a lack of transparency? Where's there a lack of accountability? All of those things, like that's the magic of the marketplace business models, is bringing transparency and an integrated customer experience, where today it's probably disaggregated and there's a lack of transparency and there's a lack of accountability across delivering something.
And the other thing I see is that the ability to reimagine existing problems in a completely new way. So the example you just gave is an incredibly powerful one. As well as, identify problems that maybe the rest of us don't see, and figure out how to solve them. I mean, we know through the history of entrepreneurship, that's where innovation comes from, right? A new way of looking at an existing problem, Henry Ford, and the identification of a problem that nobody knew they had, Clarence Birdseye Frozen Food. But in either case, there's some insight that the innovator or entrepreneur has around a known or unknown problem, and sees an approach of one sort or another, whether it's freezing the food on the ice, or whether it's how do I reimagine digital commerce, or whatever it is in this new context. And so what I love about what you're saying, John, is what IoT really does is, if we start to ask ourselves the question, what is a legendary customer experience and problems along that whole sort of chain, if you will, and how do we reimagine that in a world where we have the cloud and social, and now we can have a physical connection to the digital world? That's fascinating.
Yeah, and Amazon's recipe around that starts with just customer empathy and customer obsession, and using real data and real insights, but challenging yourself. Like, just because it's that way today doesn't mean it has to be that way tomorrow. And I think so many of the big innovation ideas comes from focusing on the small, everyday, like operational improvements that we have to have. Like, well, how do I shrink that cycle time? How do I make it better? Why does it work that way? And when you approach like everyday problem solving with challenging the status quo, once in a while, a big idea will come to you as an organization. And that's why I think it's completely in line to drive for both operational excellence and innovation.
Awesome. I think on that note, John, I think we might kick out of this wave.
Christopher, thank you so much for welcoming me.
John, it's really been great. You're an awesome innovator. I really want to thank you for both your books. You're talking to a guy who, there were a handful of books early in my life that if those authors don't write those books, you and I aren't having this conversation. I also believe that you're doing something that is even more legendary in the time that we exist. One of the things I think about this time that we're in as a podcaster is there's no excuse for being stupid today. We have incredible learning organizations like, Stanford and Harvard and Yale, and of course many abroad who put some giant percentage of their curriculum online. And the fact that guys who've learned what you've learned, put it down and write it in a book. And, I don't know what people think about business authors, but I could tell you, I don't think I'll ever see a dime off Play Bigger, and we're selling a lot of it. I don't know how that works, but whatever. Here's what I know about you. You wrote those 2 books, and you're writing your 3rd book because you want to give something away. That's what I know. Well,
thanks. It's been a real joy and a blessing to have the stories to get to tell to others. So,
well, and the fact that experts like you come on to Legends and Losers and write books, and we could buy the audio version of your book for, I don't know, I haven't looked, but I bet you it's less than $20. And there's just no excuse for being stupid. And the fact that you're contributing such an extraordinary life and an extraordinary set of insights the way you are is fucking fantastic. So thank you for joining us, and most importantly, John, thank you for sharing your expertise. You're an awesome guy.
Well, thanks for all you do. I love your podcast.
Thanks, John. Best wishes, and be legendary.
Right on.
All right. Well, there it is, John Rossman. Amazing. So I just can't get over that we get to have these conversations with these people because the conversation called "How do you continue to innovate and design and dominate new categories?" If you're lucky enough to have got one right, is an incredibly powerful conversation. All right, if you like this episode of Legends and Losers, you'll love episode number 3 with the world's #1 technology analyst, Ray Wang, called "How to Win in a Winner-Take-All World." I'd also like to let you know that my good friends at NetSuite have asked me to come and do a series of seminars with them called Navigating in a Winner-Take-All World, How to Win Your Own Next. And I'll be in Houston, Texas on June 20th, speaking and doing a book signing with my friends at NetSuite. If you're in the area, come on out. I also like to do a couple shout outs to Ian Faison. I hope I'm saying your last name right, Ian, for your fun and fantastic tweets. I appreciate it very much. Catherine, I'm gonna guess Getz, for loving episode 24 with Blair Shane from Sequoia. Thank you so much. for Posey Mannequin for her very steezy tweets. Posey, thank you. It's great to know you're out there. And a huge shout out to an amazing place, the Compass Bookstore at San Francisco International Airport, because they are now stocking the bestseller Play Bigger. And as you may know, really only the hottest of the hot end up in those airport bookstores because there's such little shelf space. So to have made it to the SFO bookstore is an incredible thing. And I want to say thank you so much to the folks at Compass Bookstores. All right. Please subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. This podcast is not free. We would love it if you left us a legendary review. Remember, reviews send podcasts to Nirvana. So please, you can find us on Facebook.com/groups/legends and losers. We'd love it if you joined us there. On the Twitter machine at Legends Losers. And you can always email us. We love it at blackhole@legendsandlosers.com. We would like to thank HarperCollins Instant Classic, Play Bigger, How Pirates, Dreamers, and Innovators Create and Dominate Markets. Equity Directory, the invite network of entrepreneurs and startup talent exchanging work for equity. Our good friends at onelifefullylive.org, helping you dream, plan, and live your best life. Our friends at NetSuite, #1 in cloud ERP. The legendary 1185 in Silicon Valley, where the great brands come from. The Humane Society of America, be legendary, rescue an animal. Scotch. I like Scotch. The Build a Better Agency podcast with our friend Drew McClellan. Thanks for having me on, Drew. You got a great show. Our friends at Compass Bookstore at SFO. One more time, we want to remind you, reading on planes makes you sexy. Tahoe Truckee Homes, we make Tahoe dreams come true. The Garlic Marketing Show with the marketing podcast that does not stink with Ian Garlic. Dear friends at Verve Coffee, put some Santa Cruz in your coffee cup. And the amazing smash hit book, The Amazon Way, 14 Leadership Principles Behind the World's Most Disruptive Company by today's guest, John Rossman, and our friends at IDEO, Design Thinking Leaders Worldwide. Today's information is provided to you solely for informational purposes. This oddcast is produced in a studio that does contain nuts. This oddcast is the sole property of the Legends and Losers Oddcast Network, and we ask you to please share the shit out of it. We want to warn you that the producers of today's oddcast may have been consuming libations. Remind you to teach entrepreneurship. There's no such thing as a participation award. Hey, don't hit your sister. Remember, we're on YouTube. We're a TV show too. You can't be a legend without being a loser. We hated United Airlines before it was even cool. And hey, man, Colin, this oddcast really ties the room together. And we need to send our deepest apologies to United CEO Oscar Munoz. Sorry, Oscar, we just ran out of time for you. That's it, friends. Be legendary.